what we want to do is to really think about the impact of the coronavirus on women's mental health, and particularly think about different groups of women, Black, Asian, minority ethnic women. We've been looking at disabled women. Some of our data has shown, for example, that disabled women have some of the highest levels of anxiety and most adversely impacted well-being. Same true for BAME women. Low paid and frontline workers too, very high levels of anxiety. Single parents, mothers of young children. We know that those experiences of women have been really not at the forefront of decision makers' priorities. They haven't been on the government agenda. We've been working hard to put them there, but we have to keep making women visible, which is why the Corona campaign has got the hashtag Make Women Visible. You can join tonight's conversation, by the way, by going online to Twitter and using the hashtag Corona Conversations. But I'm going to get to our panel now because I want to introduce them to you and give us an opportunity to hear from them, because I've been rambling on for quite a long time. And I'll just come to each of them in turn. So we've got with us from Black Minds Matter, Agnes Mwakatuma, who was born in Tanzania. And Agnes has lived in the UK for 12 years and has studied at the University of Bristol and has founded Black Minds Matter just this year. So it's an organisation run by volunteers that is designed to meet the needs of the Black community, in particular in terms of mental health. So welcome, Agnes, good to have you with us. And then we've got Dawn Butler, who's a familiar face to Fawcett, who's the Labour MP for Brent Central and former Women Equality's shadow spokeswoman. And she's going to be talking about, in particular, what she's seeing through her constituency casework, the impact on Brent Central, obviously a very important and central sort of London borough, so she's getting a lot of cases coming through her constituency casework, and really what some of the issues are for women, and particularly, you know, low-paid women, women who are juggling work and care, and how we can support their mental health. And then we've got two women from the Young Women's Trust who are with us from the Young Women's Trust panel. And Young Women's Trust is, again, one of our sister organisations. And Freya, Pulham-Binch, who is on the advisory panel, is passionate about campaigning on mental health and women's rights and equality at work. And she's also about to start college and is based in Spilsby. So welcome, Freya. And then we've got Priscilla Casey from Young Women's Trust Advisory Panel, a former member, sorry. And she's a passion for cooking as a self-employed chef and also passionate about working with young people. So we're going to hear a bit from Priscilla too. And then finally, we've got Vicki Nash, who's the head of policy and campaigns at Mind. She has been campaigning and lobbying for many years and leads Mind's policy and lobbying work, and ensures that they reflect the needs and experiences of people with mental health problems and speak truth to power. So I'm going to begin by opening up the discussion with our panel, and then hopefully we'll get some time to put questions to them that come through the chat function and get you involved in the event as we go along. But Vicki, can I come to you first and give you an opportunity just to set the scene for us a bit? Because I think what we really need to know, with all the work that Mind does, the really fantastic work that Mind does, what is the data that you've got telling us about the impacts of coronavirus on women and girls, and you know, the broader impact it's having on the nation's mental health?
Thank you, and thanks so much for letting Mind be part of this. It's such a fantastic event and great that you're focusing on women's mental health. I think it's really important to start the conversation and think about what was going on before the pandemic. We already had serious concerns about women's mental health, especially young women's mental health. We've started to see an increase in mental illness amongst women. That's been on the rise for the last few years, and young women have emerged as a particularly high risk group for mental health problems. About a quarter of them are developing mental health problems, a quarter of them are self-harming, and 1 in 7 are experiencing PTSD. So that's the scene setter. And then obviously we've had COVID hit, and COVID will leave a kind of deep and lasting scar on the mental health of our nation. And we're talking about the fact that people have talked about very different peaks and when we're going to get a spike COVID. We haven't even reached the peak of the first round of the mental health problems resulting from COVID. That's coming this quarter, we think. And when you start to think about what we've experienced already with what's to come with the recession, a potential, you know, further lockdowns come in, and we need to be making sure we're prioritizing the mental health of the population as we go forward. At the early part of COVID, we ran a survey. We got about 16,000 results, and that told us that more than half of adults and over 2/3 of people have said that their mental health has, you know, has gotten worse during that period of lockdown. And women, disabled people, people living in social housing, and parents are much more likely to report that their mental health has got worse during that period of lockdown. We also found through our research that people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, like how others have found it, have reported that their mental health got worse compared to their white counterparts. And problems with housing or employment or financial security have impacted greater on those communities than their white counterparts. There's a whole host of reasons as to why those our mental health has been declining. Restrictions, boredom, particularly for young people, feelings of loneliness. But for many people who wanted to seek help, they simply couldn't access that. And 1 in 4 people said that they weren't able to access the support they needed when they needed it, which is really worrying. And what's also worrying is that actually quite a few people, both adults and young people, felt that their mental health wasn't important enough to access. They felt that that it was other things that should take priority, and that just stores up problems for further down the line. Specifically with women, we definitely saw that women's mental health was reported as getting worse compared to men, and particularly, as I said, parents, particularly those with children under 18, said that combination of juggling work and looking after children took a real toll on their mental health. And what's particularly interesting for women is through our findings that women were far more likely to cope with the stresses of lockdown and COVID by over or under eating. So you start to see some of these trends and themes playing out and are kind of exacerbated as a result of lockdown. I mean, that survey was really done at the beginning of lockdown. We're hoping to repeat it towards the end. So it will be further down the line. So it will be interesting to see how those findings potentially change or morph. But that's what we've seen in that early part of lockdown, and what we're starting to hear now, particularly I suppose as we go into the next phase of what could be quite a long period of uncertainty for us. And hopefully that sets a bit of a scene about what we need to unpick a bit more in this conversation.
Thanks very much for that, Vicki. And actually, one of the other things I meant to say earlier, which I missed out, so I'll go back to say it now, is just to give you a flavour of some of the Corona Diaries, the work that we've been doing, and some of the contributions that women have been making through those diaries, really highlighting a lot of the issues you've just been referring to, Vicki. So one woman said, "I live with an eating disorder, a type of anorexia, which I've been recovering from for about 1.5 years. I found the anorexic thoughts and tendencies are beginning to creep back into my routine and lifestyle. I would say that trying to keep my recovery and mental health on track has been very difficult." So I think people with existing conditions and really struggling to cope with those existing conditions, it's kind of being aggravated by what's happening now. Another one, I wake up each morning and wondering if it's worth getting up, getting dressed, or whether I can be bothered to go for my daily walk. Increasingly, I have thoughts as to whether I can keep going. I miss the company of being with people. So it's that day-to-day grind as well that makes it really, really significant in terms of toll on mental health.
I think that's it, Sam. And what we're seeing is new problems developing as well as existing problems worsening. So it's that kind of double, it's that double effect that we're starting to see really big.
Yeah, thank you. And now I'm going to come to Priscilla and Freya to give us the contribution from their perspective as Young Women's Trust panel members. Priscilla, can I come to you first? What are your reflections and experiences, particularly from the perspective of young women, who we know have really been having it particularly difficult during this whole coronavirus crisis?
Yeah, so in regards to young women, I think that it's no secret that, social media is not the best place in terms of what is perpetuated in regards to self-esteem and unrealistic body ideals and beauty ideals. So I think prior to COVID, a young woman could break up her day maybe by going to college, going to university. So although that pressure was always there, there were viable distractions in place, whereas now during lockdown, everyone's at home, everyone's idle, so it's a lot easier to be negatively influenced by the things that you see on your computer screen. So I think that that was definitely a big factor in the negative influence on mental health in regards to young women. I did actually hear that an MP named Luke Evans was trying to push a bill in regards to not allowing heavily edited photos to be published on Instagram without some sort of notification that they had been edited. So that's a positive, but I think that definitely social media had a big play in regards to the negative kind of impact on the mental health of young women. And I was very surprised actually that there wasn't more of a conversation surrounding it, seeing as though there is a big awareness that a lot of unrealistic beauty and body ideals are pushed on platforms such as Instagram, Twitter and the like. So I think that definitely had a huge role to play in that.
And that's always been a significant issue, but I think it's probably become more significant during this lockdown period when you've had less face-to-face contact. So all that kind of phone and online engagement becomes everything, doesn't it? You know, everything is through that medium. I mean, we know that Glitch, one of our partners, has been highlighting the increase in sexual harassment online, just bullying and harassment online because people are working from home. Doesn't mean that the harassment goes away, just goes and finds another way to get to women. Thanks for that. Now, Freya, can I come to you? What's your experience been, and what's your perspective on this issue?
Really, mental health is just a hard topic in general. I think with young women, it is hard because you have to feel connected with that person that you want to talk to, and you have to feel understood. And I think a lot of young women now struggle with how the person that they're talking to is viewing them. Like, personally, I felt not listened to, and I felt that due to my age that they thought, oh, she's not really serious about what she's talking about. It might be just a phase, like it's not going to be a lifeline thing. But it is, and it is such a difficult thing, and it has left everyone feeling isolated because you can't go out and do what you normally do. You can't just go to the shop and just walk in and grab what you want. You're limited to stuff, and it's just, mental health is just so hard, and the coronavirus really has just kind of threw everything up in the air in so many different ways.
No, I think that's right. It is exacerbating all those existing issues, isn't it, and really magnifying them. Agnes, can I come to you now and just talk a little bit more about your work at Black Minds Matter, and we'll put a link up in the chat to your donate ask. So let's see if we can get a few donations for you as we're going through the event and give you a bit of support. And you've obviously launched this in response to particularly Black Lives Matter this year, and the additional pressure and stress experienced by the Black community. But tell us a bit more about what you're doing and what you've managed to pull together.
So yeah, we founded Black Minds Matter on exactly the 1st of June. This was after noticing the mental health of a lot of people around us deteriorate. And the reason why we thought, raising funds for therapy would have been a great idea is, for example, I grew up in a predominantly white area. I grew up in Devon, in Torquay. And one thing that I really struggled to find, just touching on what Freya mentioned, was a therapist that really understood me and understood where I was from. So even though there were mental health services available, they just weren't, tailored to the cultural differences that existed in my life. So our initial response was, Black people deserve safe spaces and quality mental health support. And, we wanted just to raise as much funds as possible just to connect as many Black people in the UK with Black therapists. And we were so blindsided in the sense that we didn't actually know how big this problem was. And before the end of the first week, by the 7th of June, we already had about 1,500 requests for therapy. And fast forward 2 months now, we've got roughly 2,600 people on the waiting list for therapy. We launch our therapy sessions in 5 weeks. And, for us, the most important thing is just ensuring that we work with, quality Black therapists who not only believe in our mission, but who are part of the board, who have, the correct qualifications, who have insurance, DBS checks, just making sure that we, do the correct safeguarding measures in place before we let off, a bunch of people for therapy. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and just trying to address, the stigma surrounding mental health overall in the Black community, and just encouraging more research into Black mental health, because that's one thing that we noticed when we were starting. There isn't enough research out there for Black mental health, even though the figures do show that, Black people are 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with psychosis and 3 to 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Why isn't the government looking into these figures? Why aren't they trying to find a solution or find, the problem? So that's kind of where we're at, just trying to push for long-term change when it comes to Black mental health in general.
It's really brilliant, really fantastic. And the level of demand is just off the scale, isn't it? And, that's probably just the tip of the iceberg, because there's so many more people who need to hear about what you're doing. But I know that currently the waiting list is closed, isn't it? So we can't direct people to join that waiting list at the moment, but hopefully with a bit more funding, you might be able to reopen it next year. Dawn, can I come to you now and bring you into this conversation, just to give us your reflections based on what you've heard and what you're seeing through your casework and your constituency? And I know a lot of the policy issues that we've been dealing with, the impact on women, impact on BAME communities, impact on disabled women, because you had that equalities brief, backwards. So just tell us what's your experience been as a Labour MP in London?
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for this discussion today. It's a really important debate and discussion. So everything that everybody's said, I can relate to, and it's very, very prevalent in my constituency in Brent. And the thing is that the pandemic and lockdown has just shone a light on all of the issues and the problems that already existed, but it's just in a way made it worse. So people who were struggling with overcrowded households, were no longer able to escape. So you had all of those mental health problems then just amplifying. I've got women who suffered domestic violence, who were able to escape, go to the shops, go to work, no longer able to do that. And in the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, where sadly and devastatingly, 2 women a week were killed by a partner or former partner, that rose to 5 women a week. So everything just became more and more amplified and got worse and worse. And then you had women, and these are all women, so you have women who were working, who all of a sudden had to work from home and do Zoom calls, but were also expected to look after the kids and feed the kids and do all of that juggling by themselves. And then I've seen on the chat that we've got talk of migrant women and women who were going through their status and what was happening, and all of a sudden all of that was halted, or they were unable to get in touch with anybody. So that increased mental anxiety. And then we've got PTSD. So we've got all the people who are going to be suffering from PTSD, people in the NHS that we know are dominated by women, and lots of women of colour who often are on the front line. They're now suffering from PTSD and have been struggling to cope with all of that. And lastly, I'll mention Agnes talked about how many people contacted her services right at the very beginning. Well, after the brutal killing of George Floyd, it took an extreme mental toll, especially on African Caribbean people and men, because it brought back a generational trauma of discrimination and racism and abuse. So all of a sudden there was this trauma that many Black people had to confront. And then on top of that, you know, they're asked to comment all the time or help do different things or come up with strategies. So, you know, I found that there was just the one common thread amongst everybody in my constituency has been mental health. And it used to be sort of the silent killer. It used to be the thing that nobody really talked about. And I just think it's vitally important that we talk about mental health every single day in everything that we do. And young people and kids going back to school, the government should have made sure that there was mental health capacity in schools to help kids going back to school, and they haven't done that. So there needs to be a lot of investment. When we talk about investment in money, if we don't invest in people and their mental health, then we are doing a disservice to everything else that we do. So there's no excuse not to invest. And I think that we really need to, in a way, be each other's keeper, but make sure we have conversations like this and encourage people to seek help and support.
No, absolutely. And I think, I mean, you raised that point about the impact on parents and schools and mental health for children. I just wanted to bring in a question we've had submitted from a single parent. Please can you ask about support for single parents, parenting 24/7, mostly mothers. What support is there for single mothers and their children? I haven't had a moment to myself since the 8th of March, uninterrupted. My mental health is suffering, and as a result, the well-being of my children is suffering. I tried to organise a play therapist for my son and was told it is £42 an hour per week. I'm currently on benefits and there's a big waiting list for services in my area. So she's got no prospects of affording anything like that. And there's nothing that she can turn to in her school, but she really needs that support, and she needs her son to have that support. And I know, you know, organisations like Gingerbread do really fantastic work for single parents, but they haven't got the capacity or the expertise to provide mental health support. I don't know, Vicki, did you want to come in on that from a sort of mind perspective? Are there any specialist services for, you know, single parents or people with particular needs like that that you can think of, or is it really just a huge unmet need?
I mean, I think it's a huge unmet need. I think if you look in general at mental health services, particularly those that are ones that are led by voluntary organisations, they've undergone a huge kind of transformation, like many aspects of our society, where they suddenly had to almost like immediately shut up shop and switch to online opportunities. And I think they're not, you know, they're nowhere near where they were beforehand in terms of being able to provide that face-to-face contact. And I think, I mean, my heart goes out to the person that's put that question in, because I think, speaking realistically, where I can't see where that help is going to come. There undoubtedly will be specialist organisations that provide that. But whether there's waiting lists that you're able to access it, you need the help now, not in 18 months' time. 18 months' time, the situation is going to be far worse for those individuals that don't get the help now. It's really hard to see where that support is, and that's why we need a massive investment in delivering not only the support that the government has already promised, but additional funding to go in to help with the new kind of levels of support that are going to be required, which will look different to what they had on paper and that are in the plans prior to COVID in terms of mental health support, I think. And
do you think, and this is sort of a question sort of I'm just throwing out there to all of you, but do you think that, you know, the focus on getting the economy going again, getting children back into school, that has kind of displaced the focus on health and mental health in particular? I mean, it feels like, you know, that's leapfrogged everything now to sort of be the top priority, and actually now, you know, we're just unraveling everything else. All the kind of focus on health, the people who are shielding, mental health consequences, none of that has really been that visible. Freya, what do you think from a young woman's perspective? Do you feel that anyone's thinking about your mental health?
No, like before, obviously COVID, I was on a waiting list, and I'd been on the waiting list for 6 months, waiting for face-to-face therapy. Obviously COVID hit, and I had to go to telephone. Obviously I couldn't bond with the lady. She was outstanding, she was lovely, and I can't fault her, but because I couldn't see her face-to-face and I couldn't connect with her, I struggled and I had to discharge myself. That was at the start of COVID, and obviously thankfully now I've got a psychiatrist appointment in October, but for the whole time I was waiting, it felt like it was all for nothing, because I was waiting for it to just kind of be thrown back in my face. And there needs to be a lot more support with young women, especially because, like you've just said, the focus around school and getting the kids back to education is the priority for everything right now, when that is a priority, but mental health is a priority as well, because the kids are going to have and like could develop mental health issues, and they need the support. And you've got the parents that have the worries of their children going back to school and whether they're going to be okay, whether they're going to be able to cope with the transition of having to wear a face mask in school and having everything change. And change is such a hard thing for children in the best of times, and now it's even harder. And there's not enough support for young women mental health. They just kind of don't take us seriously, and they kind of think that we'll cope because we have a lot of stress in our lives already. But no, it's not. Like, we can't deal with it, and we do need support.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a comment here in the chat function I'm reading that says the NHS seems to have cancelled all the one-to-one sessions since the waiting list was too big and people are being moved to group therapy. What is there out there for people for whom group therapy doesn't work? Because obviously there'll be a lot of cases where it's not appropriate. So, I mean, Vicki, from your perspective, are you seeing that too, that people have been just given group therapy or nothing?
Yeah, I mean, that was happening before COVID, and so we were hearing quite a lot because of the pressures on the waiting list, and particularly around IAPT, or improving access to psychological therapies, talking therapies. Lots of people were being offered only group therapy, which was okay for some, but completely inappropriate for others. Then everything went online, which again, as Freya so eloquently put, it works for some people, but definitely not for everyone. And so you've got that then a combination of everything being shoved online and in group sessions, and that clearly isn't going to work for people. And it's not surprising that you get significant dropout rates, because it's simply not helping. It's actually hindering some people. So what we've definitely been looking at in terms of and trying to encourage the government and the NHS to think about when they're thinking about what might happen next, is you need to make sure that you have a blended approach, particularly around talking therapies. So offering online digital options, but it has to be accompanied with face-to-face. And actually that's what most people want. They want a combination. They want to be able to kind of pick the right kind of combination that's going to work for them and their needs. You can't shove everyone online, and you can't shove everyone into a group. It's just not going to work. It's actually a waste of money.
No, absolutely. And one of the other issues that's come through, both it's coming through a bit in the chat, but also it's been put to us in advance of the session, is the impact in terms of care homes of cutting people off from their families. So people being isolated, being told that they can't have visitors, and also the impact on care staff who have had to maybe during this lockdown period put themselves at risk, their own physical health, their mental health, cut themselves off from their families, some sleeping in their care homes for weeks to protect their residents. So, both, low-paid frontline workers really putting their mental health under huge strain, and then also the residents who were feeling massively isolated. And I just wondered, Dawn, whether you had any particular kind of reflections on that, either from the sort of care staff's perspective or thinking about the older people and those who need that contact that they're not getting with their families at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, isolation is a driver and a trigger in regards to people with, for all of us with mental health, because we all have mental health. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And isolation can trigger like episodes and breakdowns. And we found that people in care homes had to isolate from their families to look after other people in care homes. There was also the worry in regards to the messaging, because the messaging has not been very clear from the government. So that created a lot of anxiety for people. And where things weren't making sense, people started to feel that with different theories. So I had lots of people who were contacting me, and some of them were conspiracy theories, which were way out there, but then some of them, were actually a reality and true. So that came, so everything that was happening was just added to the anxiety. And somebody had said, like, what can we do? Well, I mean, there is this trade-off between health and wealth. And, you know, like the government's saying that we've got to put everybody back to work, and everyone needs to get back to work because we have to get the economy going. And it's glaringly obvious to most people that you cannot divorce health from wealth. If people are not healthy, then they cannot be integrated back into the economy, and we can't have the economy working. So all this talk, that keeps going on is actually really quite damaging. And I think we have to get the government to change their language and change their direction of travel. And we have to invest in health. There's nothing, without health, you don't have anything else.
Yeah, and you need a track and trace system that works, right? So you can actually trust it, and then people will start going out.
Absolutely.
World beating, isn't it? Agnes, I've got a question for you. So I just wanted to, I've got it on my phone, so that's why I'm looking down here. What do you need from government to make changes, improve the situation of providing support for those who need it? So if you could get a bit of government support, imagine a day when actually the government starts to fund some of the work that you're doing, really important work that you're doing. What would make a real difference to you?
The first thing that would really mean a lot to an organisation like Black Lives Matter is a bit of acknowledgement from the government of how we have, as a community, the Black community, been, systematically oppressed for years. We can't get any help from them until they can acknowledge the fact that we are disadvantaged in comparison to our white counterparts. But after that, you could really use more, funding into Black mental health resources in general. And, the government to really look into having more Black mental health tailored treatment in a lot of NHS hospitals. Like, since we began, we've been quite surprised that we've had quite, large NHS hospitals in very large towns reach out to us and tell us that, they don't have a Black therapist on their rota. And it's not because, Black therapists, live under a rock. It's simply because they haven't quite bothered to prioritise Black mental health. So it's weird to me to even think that, we've existed in this country for a very long time, and it's taken them, nearly 100 years to even consider Black mental health as a priority. But yeah, a lot of accountability needs to happen moving forward from the government before they can even think about funding. We need accountability and a lot more justice.
Yeah, and the point you made in your opening contribution about lack of data on Black people's mental health as well is incredibly important, because, we can't make it visible without that. We can't actually push it up the agenda without that basic research data. So that's really fundamentally important as well. There's a question here. So we're going to turn for the sort of last part of the session to really think about moving forwards, what government can do, what we can do, each of us, and within our own kind of spheres of influence and organisations to drive change. So there's one here from Emily Turner who says, how can we ensure the very real themes the panellists have been discussing are actually heard and taken into account in the COVID recovery plans at senior level? I just wonder from, particularly from Young Women's Trust perspective, say, Priscilla, I don't know if you've got a view on this in terms of getting young women's voices heard in government. Sometimes it can feel incredibly, like a long way off, when you've got, ministers standing there in press conferences and just not engaging with your lives at all, not thinking about you. How are you going to get your issues and your experiences up the agenda?
So thankfully, organisations such as the Young Women's Trust have been that gateway, linking people like myself to government. I've been involved in multiple talks in spaces such as City Hall, even Parliament itself. I was engaged in the Women in Work APWG meetings. So, organisations like the Young Women's Trust, there's several others as well, the Diana Award that I've been involved with, are just really important and create that link between young women like myself and government. Obviously, the problem is funding, things like that. These organisations need the funding, they need the donations, and without that, it can be very difficult to kind of progress the conversation. And then again, during COVID, that's been difficult. Everyone's kind of keeping close hands on their pockets, understandably. So raising donations and raising funds for activities such as that can be a bit difficult. But definitely there are plenty of organisations that are doing excellent work in creating that bridge and that connection between government and politicians, MPs and young women. Otherwise, I don't see really that there wouldn't be, not to sound pessimistic, but I don't see much other way that someone like me could easily access MPs and the like.
Yeah, and we have to keep up that pressure and keep those opportunities coming, don't we, in the coming year, because it's going to get even more important to make sure that you're visible. And Vicki, from your perspective, in terms of mental health within, say, the Department of Health, and getting government to really put mental health on the same par as other aspects of healthcare, do you feel that that we've reached a turning point on that? It did seem maybe a couple of years ago that there was a bit of a step change in attitudes to mental health, and we were getting through in a way that you weren't before. Has that stayed the case, or if you feel like you've gone backwards a bit?
It's definitely going backwards, and that was happening before COVID, and a lot of it comes down to the leadership and how important governments see mental health. I think under the previous Prime Minister, we had seen mental health being very much kind of at the core of number 10, and that's just not the case now, and it's not the case, and that filters through the different government departments and the different secretaries of state that we've got. So we were faced with that beforehand, and then obviously with COVID, understandably, a lot of that focus really went into kind of how do we cope with that immediate emergency, that immediate crisis, which is understandable, but now it's almost we're having to go back to some of the really basic messaging that we used to say about don't forget about mental health. Have you thought about mental health? When we're looking at kind of new guidance that's coming out from NHS around discharge, or some of the things that we already had in progress, so something like the Mental Health Act, or Shenny's Law, which was designed to kind of tackle some of the use of restraint in mental health settings, particularly amongst black people, but also young women, who are horrendous rates of restraint used on young women compared to young men. All of this stuff is on hold, and when you ask government, how do you can't you get moving with some of this stuff, given that a lot of the work was already done? It's such a weak response. There's no, we haven't got time, we haven't got capacity. Well, the sector's there willing to help you move these things forward, as are our politicians, but it's a real leadership battle at the moment, I think, and one that we haven't quite worked out how to kind of move the dial on a bit. So it's a work in progress, but yeah, it's definitely not an easy environment, like for lots of people at the moment, I think, but particularly from a mental health perspective, the goalposts have moved.
Our experience is that some of the battles we thought we'd won, in terms of some of the arguments we thought we'd had in recent years, we feel like we're having to have all over again. So the visibility of the importance of maternal employment, for example, or the impacts on the gender pay gap, or the importance of childcare to enable parents to get to work, fairly basic stuff, but we're having to make all those arguments all over again. Really hard to get them visible within government, which really does worry me. I've got a question here for Dawn. So it's just a very sort of open question, but what can the government and opposition actually do now to make positive changes? So what would you like to see? If Boris Johnson had a press conference tomorrow, or he came to Parliament and announced something, what would you like to see, particularly in terms of mental health?
Well, we've got the Labour Party have put forward a mental health strategy, and the government could implement that, which talks about investment in mental health, talking therapies, help in schools, PTSD support. So all of that, I mean, it takes a commitment, and it takes investment, and it takes somebody that's kind of got the understanding and the sensitivities to understand that. I don't think that there's any government minister that currently has that at the moment, I'm afraid. I think that we need to focus on, women. Women are the backbone of everything kind of that happens in society, and we know that disproportionately they're always more negatively affected, whether it be via the cuts, whether it be poverty, and all that's happened during COVID is that has been exacerbated. So where we've got households where there's been people unable to eat, so we've had to protect them and shield them and make sure that they get help. you know, and all of that kind of changes. And there's that additional stress of feeling that you're inadequate and you're not able to, you know, to help care for your kids or your family. And then you've got all the unpaid work that women do got bigger and bigger and bigger during COVID. They had to do more and more and more of it. So all of the work that they did that was unseen, undervalued, they had to do more of it during COVID and lockdown. And it's just been extremely stressful. And, you know, African Caribbean and Asian and, you know, minority ethnic women, you know, they've suffered more than any other group of women. And again, that's just been exacerbated under COVID. So we do need a government that is going to accept that that happens. And instead of pretending that none of this stuff happens, you know, actually say, what are we going to do to fix it? Because if we don't, we're just building up problems for the next 5 or 6 weeks. In 5 or 6 weeks, we're going to have all the Brexit fiasco, right? And that, you know, that causes anxiety to everybody. If it doesn't, it should. But you're going to have all of that Brexit anxiety. It's going to compound everything else that's currently happened, and we're going to be in a deep recession. I mean, this is just a perfect storm for something really bad.
Yeah, and obviously lots of people are going to be losing their jobs. You know, we've got households who are taking severe cuts in income. You know, poverty, again, big driver in terms of mental ill health. And I just wonder, if, Agnes, from your perspective, in terms of the people coming to you, are you seeing any of those issues playing out through the clients coming to your services?
Definitely. I think one of the things that we kind of assumed when we first started is we'd have a lot of racial trauma post, you know, police brutality in America and the Black Lives Matter movement. But as time has gone on, we are, you know, completely reminded of the fact that Black people, you know, are fully fledged human beings, and they have been, you know, affected by COVID just as much as police brutality and racial trauma. So it's been quite difficult to, you know, get so many messages from so many young women, from so many single mums who are just screaming out for help, and just trying to find a solution for that has been quite challenging. But, you know, we hope to be able to reach out to as many people to offer as much support. But yeah, definitely a lot of Black women especially have found this time especially difficult, especially because a lot of our clients are quite religious, and not being able to leave the house and go to church and use that as a form of therapy has, you know, taken its toll.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. So you just lose your whole support network overnight, and your identity, you know, because it's where you belong and it's who you are. So it's really fundamentally important. There's a question coming in here about employers. I was going to ask a question about employers. There's a question here saying, are employers and companies providing access to mental health support services which could help some people and supplement the services provided by the NHS? And I know some employers do. Some employers will fund counselling or other services and support. Some might have just started doing it, but I just wondered, you know, I don't know whether Vicki or Freya or anyone wants to come in on that particular question. Vicki, do you know of employers that do provide support?
Yeah, I think it's kind of varied, as you would imagine. So I think some employers are great. We run a kind of a mental health index similar to Stonewall's kind of index in terms of good employers, and so there's some really great examples of organisations that are really well equipped and focus on the mental health and well-being of their employees. Saying that, there's an awful lot of employers that don't do that, partly because they are a bit scared. They're not quite sure what to do. It sounds quite scary and big and expensive, and others, obviously, you do have some more kind of unscrupulous employers that's really just not on their agenda at all. So I think it does vary. I mean, I think there's a really good practical action that government can take around this, which is about publishing guidance for employers on their requirements to support disabled people, particularly people with mental health problems, in returning to work. And you've seen a lot of this over the last few weeks, you know, be in work, don't be in work, but in a small group of 6. Actually, I'm actually confused about what you can and can't do. So actually some guidance that really is focused for employers to help disabled workers get back into work, because we also know that there's issues with workers that have been shielding or have been at home, and how that's been supported. So that, again, there's a very practical job that government can do, and also I think on a practical base around employment, looking at kind of statutory sick pay. So we've been campaigning this year around making changes to statutory sick pay so that you can get the money on day one, you don't have to wait, and also you should up the rate of it, and we saw some of those temporary changes happen in COVID, so it shows you that you can do it if you want to. Government can do it if you want to, but you can't really fix the issues of people working through when they should be isolating, if you can't really fix those without fixing statutory sick pay, basically, which actually that point's been kind of well made but not necessarily well heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a question coming through about young women's access to online support. I'm just trying to find it as I'm talking to you. Have there been any positive initiatives online or on social media to help with mental health issues facing young women? I don't know whether either Freya or Priscilla have any insight into that from your perspective. Have you heard anything that you're aware of that are particularly targeted at young women? I know Young Women's Trust has been fundraising for sort of an emergency fund, hasn't it? Which has been more about providing financial support. But Freya, are you aware of anything?
We did a No Young Women Left Behind campaign. I was in the campaign video. That went around. Obviously, there was the emergency fund, which obviously helped, obviously because of young women being furloughed and obviously losing their job. The emergency fund helped obviously them pay the bills, because obviously a lot of them did, with obviously Universal Credit having the 5-week wait. Obviously they're left without any money on how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to pay their bills, how are they going to like get stuff for their children, like, and obviously we did do that, and that was quite big, and there was I did read a lot of positive responses about that, where people have said that it was amazing, it really helped, it came when they needed it the most, and it's just, yeah.
So that's addressing one of the underlying causes, because we know that's a driver for poor mental health. So actually dealing with the poverty that young women are experiencing is really fundamental to helping their mental health, actually, and supporting it. There's a great question coming in. I want to ask you this one, Dawn. What about caring for your own mental health as an activist and as a politician? I mean, obviously, politicians get a huge amount of abuse online. We know that. We featured that in Fawcett, we talked about it. Black politicians get 10 times the abuse that white women get. Yeah, so how do you look after yourself in that situation as a campaigner and a politician and activist?
Good question. My abuse at the moment is relentless. I've got a core group of racist trolls that will just troll anything that I put online. And, I think the only way that I do it really is I have to switch off. So sometimes I have to just not look at social media and try not to think about it. I don't read the abuse. So I tend not to scroll. I tend to post but not scroll. My office sort of goes through all of the abuse, and it's daily abuse. And I think lockdown has made it worse. So nasty people have become more nasty. So I think lockdown has really made it worse. I think I thought lockdown was very draining. Because every day it was just filled with bad news, and I wasn't expecting that, actually. I knew I'd be working all through lockdown, but I wasn't really expecting all of the bad news every single day. And I think one day I just had to stop because I had bad news overload. And I really think it is important that we look after our own mental health, otherwise we can't look after anybody else. So yes, it affects me as a politician the same as it would affect anyone else. My counteract to that, so how I counteract that is actually sort of helping people actually helps my mental health. If I help people, or I get a win, or I sort something out for somebody, that actually helps my mental health. And talking to young people helps my mental health. So, you know, as a reverse of that, that's the other thing that I do to kind of help. But thank you for asking.
Well, I think it's a real issue. It's certainly an issue in the feminist space where, you know, women have to take time out and recharge and look after themselves, because it's just relentless and it just grinds you down after a while. And it's just got 10 times worse in this COVID environment, as you say. And Vicki, I've got a question for you about NHS services. So for Marie McEntee, who says, in your view, what would be your top recommendations for what the NHS can do locally to address women's mental health? So, you know, often it's about those sort of local services, isn't it? And what could they do?
Oh, what a great question. Well, first part is probably ask local women what they need, so you can work out what you've got missing. What we generally found, and there was a whole task force that looked at women's mental health a couple of years ago, which published, was that most women that end up in a mental health crisis situation, so in inpatient care or turning up in A&E, have experienced trauma. I remember speaking to one psychiatrist saying that everyone that in his service had some form of trauma. So the very basics is checking with women what they need, and then making sure that you've got good trauma informed and gender informed services, and providing those options, and finding out what people need, because what a young person might need would look different from someone that's juggling, you know, looking after their parents and their kids, to someone that's later on in life. So the needs will look different. So you can't just have a woman's service. It needs to be tailored for the different needs of different women at different points in time and what they've got juggling themselves. So but trauma informed and gender informed are the kind of two basic principles that all local services, there's no excuse, local services should be doing that now, and they should have been doing that before COVID, and they definitely need to be doing it during COVID.
Yeah, and absolutely with the quality impact data, really importantly, because as you say, you know, you can't just have a service that just thinks about generic population. You've got to tailor it to meet the needs of the actual population that you're serving. I just wanted to come to other panelists now, just to talk a little bit about what you do to sort of maintain your own mental health, your own resilience, what you do to care for others. Just any tips you can give to people about that sort of self-care, because I think, you know, we often, particularly as women, we often put everyone else before ourselves. We don't do that kind of oxygen mask first thing for ourselves. So, I mean, Agnes, from your perspective, you're obviously dealing with thousands of people who need your services. It must be overwhelming. You know, how do you cope, and how do you stay strong and look after yourself?
Especially like being in lockdown, one thing I've realised is I miss community. So one thing you can do, because although social media can be a very, you know, dangerous place, but if you use it to your advantage and if you use it in a safe way, you can find your own community online. And that has been my saving grace. I don't know how I would have coped with everything if I had not found my community in Black Minds Matter online. So just, you know, going out your way to find people that think like you, find people that are willing to protect you and have your back online, and just, you know, keeping your communications with them, and just limiting, you know, what you allow on your, you know, social platforms and feeds. That really helps. Learning how to be very strict when you, like, in the evenings, and when you actually turn off your phone. It's so easy when you don't have to physically get up to go somewhere the next day to stay up scrolling all day. So just being very strict and saying to yourself, I have that cut-off limit, and limiting how many hours you spend online. That has really helped me.
And I think, you know, I'm always nagging my kids to get off their phones and screens and things, and it's definitely getting them off screens a good hour before bedtime is really fundamental to them actually going to sleep. And if you don't achieve that, then it all just goes wrong. So I think, you know, and then taking that advice for yourself. And what about people around you? Is there anything you're very consciously doing to support people around you that you're coming into contact with?
I think just kind of, you know, just creating a safe space online for us, making sure that we're giving people the right tips, and giving people the right distractions, and holding different kinds of online workshops and events to really keep our community going during this tough time. Because online, it's been very difficult online, because if you don't watch someone getting murdered, you're probably going to watch someone being disrespected, someone who has the same color as you. So it's quite hard sometimes to sort of detach from that. So just kind of reminding our community that we have a safe space in Black Minds Matter, and we're just making sure that we keep our social platforms updated at all times, so people can feel seen and valued and respected.
That's lovely. And there's a lovely quote from Audrey Lord that someone's posted, so I'll read it out. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So it's great, strong quote, wonderful. Priscilla, what about you? How does it feel from your perspective? Is it being involved in the Young Women's Trust panel, is that helpful in terms of connecting to others in similar circumstances?
Yeah, definitely. So the Young Women's Trust have an initiative called Work It Out, which is essentially coaching over the telephone. I had quite a couple sessions, and I actually was eligible for a second round. So that was just really helpful in terms of having someone there that could empower me and enlighten me when I was really struggling. And I mean, in more recent times, following on from what Agnes said as well, I was very impacted by the whole Black Lives Matter situation. And I even started my own initiative, the Black Chefs Collective, to empower Black people in food. And again, like exactly what Agnes said, community in that instance was really important. It's just been amazing to be able to lean on each other during this time and have a little pocket of the internet where it's just encouragement and motivation. So that's really been a help during a time like this.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important to find strength in those moments, isn't it, and to build on that and find your own strength. And Freya, from your perspective, do you draw strength to being involved in Young Women's Trust, and what have you got a kind of support network around you?
Yeah, like I've got, if ever I'm feeling like a little bit low, or I'm feeling like a bit, I'll message one of the team, and they're always there with like, oh, I hope you're feeling better. And since lockdown, we've been doing like a lot of webinars, and just we've been so busy, and I've been getting involved in as much as I can, so that I'm like distracted and I've got something to focus on. And I've kind of just been doing that the whole of lockdown to sort of like just keep my mind sort of like okay, because I do have the tendency to have a breakdown when it gets a bit of a.
So you got to do that self-care bit and keep it going.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Vicki, from Mind's perspective, I mean, I'm guessing your team must need a lot of support as well, given the issues you'll be dealing with and the people turning to Mind for help and support as well. So, how do you all keep going?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting period of time. We've gone through an awful lot of change. Like many organisations, we've had a large number of people across the organisation on furlough, and we've got more change to come as we work through kind of what our future looks like. And at exactly the same time, you've had a real increase in demand, or a change in demand, which has required us to be thinking really quickly and responding very quickly. I mean, my colleagues in the Out Information team, I think, have just done an extraordinary job in producing information at the drop of a hat, which has gone down so well. And likewise in our team, your whole kind of plans go out the window, and we re-engineered what we had planned and came up with like our new kind of 5 tests campaign for government about what they need to do to prioritise mental health for the nation. And whilst that's incredibly stressful, and you feel like you're tearing your hair out at times, it's actually quite empowering, and you feel like you've got so much energy from that to kind of drive it on. But you can't keep at that pace the whole time. And I've definitely found there's just times you have to just stop, and you have to prioritize yourself and look after yourself, and be honest. Particularly, I found that I've been far more honest with the team about how I'm feeling and where I'm struggling than I have done previously, because I think it also, because you're not seeing your team, it's all done remotely. It's very hard to pick up on those symbols and those signs that you would see if you're seeing people in person day to day. So actually being more kind of open and honest in the communication, I think, has helped us all to kind of survive over the last kind of few months. I would also add, on a personal basis, exercise. I didn't really do much exercise beforehand, but exercise has been a real lifesaver over the last few months. And water pistol fights with our neighbours over the garden in the hot summer months, actually a good way to kind of get out any pent-up aggression through a nice water pistol fight, which we were very lucky that we were able to have. So sometimes it's the things that you least expect that make a good difference to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely echo that. And that's why, you know, for some people who are shielding, are kind of stuck indoors, they can't get out. That's why it's even more stressful for them, isn't it, in terms of not being able to kind of do those things that really give them the sort of help they need. We've got 5 minutes left, so I just wanted to come round to all of you now to get a final thought in terms of, you know, the key thing you need to see from government, or the key thing that you really want this government to do now in response to what is the mental health crisis. And is it going to be a growing crisis? Yeah, we're not at the peak of this yet, are we? It's going to get worse as we see the impact of job losses, as we see the impact of the second wave of this virus and beyond. So I'm just going to come to each of you. Agnes, from your perspective, what would be the thing that you think that they really ought to be announcing now for mental health, and particularly Black people's mental health?
A little bit more funding into Black mental health would be great. I think if you know, the government actually allocated funds towards support organisations like ourselves, or even the NHS, to really just take into account the effects of Black mental health, and also just the creative industry in general. A lot of Black creatives have been, you know, affected by COVID. So yeah, just a little bit more funding into that, and to support more Black creatives in the process.
And the creative industries also can be a great source of therapy and solutions for people with mental health problems too. So, you know, that's another important reason to invest in them. Priscilla, from your perspective, in terms of, you know, thinking about what young women need right now, what would you like to see Boris Johnson and his team announce?
Definitely more funding, but I do understand, you know, a lot of organisations and a lot of pockets of society require funding at the moment, but just more acknowledgement, just in terms of reaching out to businesses, organisations for support for young women. It can be difficult when the government hasn't specifically said what they hope to see for young women. A lot of businesses will say, well, if the government hasn't addressed it, if they haven't said this, if they haven't laid out this and this initiative, then we're not prepared to put the money forward, or we're not prepared to put the staff power forward to tackle the problems that we may be bringing forward. So, you know, if the funding isn't available, then just some acknowledgement goes a long way. Just saying, okay, we're aware that this problem is there. Anyone who has the resources to help and to solve it, please come forward, because a lot of the time, if that acknowledgement isn't there from the government, unfortunately, people just aren't willing to put their foot forward. So some acknowledgement would go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And Freya, from your perspective, would you add to Priscilla's?
To be honest, it's just more investment and support for young women, and just for young women to be taken more seriously, really. Like, there just needs to be less kind of stigma around just young women and mental health. Like, there just needs to be more support, and I agree with what everyone else has been saying as well. More funding, that definitely needs to happen.
Great, thank you. And Vicki, from Mind's perspective, what would you say?
I'd say they need to do 5 things. We've got 5 tests. You need to invest in community services. You need to protect those most at risk, reform the Mental Health Act, provide a financial safety net, and most importantly, look at the support we need for our children and young people, and particularly young women, given the challenges that they're currently facing.
5 really clear tests as well, so I think we can get behind those. So thanks very much for that. And Dawn, I'm going to give you the final word as we're coming to a close. What would you like to see Boris Johnson stand up and announce?
Well, I agree with everything that everybody has said. I also think that we need to have an acknowledgement that mental health is as important as physical health. That needs to be acknowledged. We need to have fairness and justice in the system, because, you know, Black people are over-medicated in the system, and we need to have fairness and justice in the system. We need to have a 24-hour helpline available for everybody, specialist services. We need to make sure there's follow-up that's included. And we do need to focus on post-traumatic stress disorder, because that is just going to be huge for everybody as we come out of lockdown, and as we inevitably will end up going back into some form of lockdown. This will really have devastating effect on people, and it takes investment, but it is worth the money.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to read a final quote just to sort of finish us off. Just trying to find it. In my team, who coincidentally are all women, we've had a WhatsApp group, and this has been so useful. I've never received so many positive messages on self-care. So this is a really nice message from our audience to end on. You know, we absolutely feel powerless sometimes during this COVID crisis. There's no doubt about that. But there are things we can do to help and support each other. We know women have been at the front line delivering services, but they've also been the ones who are more likely to be reaching out and supporting their neighbours, supporting their family members, you know, visiting those who are shielding and so on. So the little things we can do can still make a huge difference, particularly in something like mental health. I think it's important that we also feel we've got some power to act, and there's something we can do that's useful and constructive. I want to say a huge thank you to our panellists tonight, and thank you to all of you for joining us for what is our mental health coronavirus conversation. And we'll be back again in October with an event that's going to be looking at building back better and what that might look like, and building an ambitious agenda for women and girls. But it's been a really fascinating discussion. If you want to support our work, please go to our website. You can either become a member, and we have a concessionary rate starting from just £1 a month, or you can just donate to our work and support the corona research that we're doing, which is again still mostly driven by donations and membership subscriptions. And if you don't want to support us, support Black Minds Matter, support Mind, support the Young Women's Trust, support Frontline Women's Services, because we really need them and women really need them right now. But thank you all very much for joining, and good night.